The Battle of Monte Cassino had an impact on World War II and the Italian nation. This would allow the Allies to push through Italy and secure a foothold in the Italian areas. Monte Cassino was known as one of the last places that they needed to conquer before they could reach Rome. There were four military assaults that did happen in these areas. These were known as the First Battle of Monte Cassino, Operation Finger, Operation Dickens, and the Fourth Battle of Monte Cassino. All of these battles allowed the Allies to push and conquer the city of Monte Cassino and bomb the Monte Cassino Abbey, which allowed the German forces to fortify their positions and make the Allied advance treacherous. Between the 17th of January and 18th of May, the Monte Cassino and Gustav line were attacked on 4 occasions by Allied troops. On the 16th of May, soldiers from the Allies launched a final assault on the German defensive line, which was known as the Winter Line. On the 18th of May, 1944, the Allies put their flags over the ruins of Monte Cassino. However, the capture of Monte Cassino resulted in 55,000 Allied casualties. However, with the enemy losses estimated around 20,000 killed and wounded, this would be known as a Pyrrhic victory. A victory that results in more casualties than the opposing side. That was a brief summary of what was the Battle of Monte Cassino. There were 3 generals that were important and on the Allied side. These included American Commander Mark Clark, British Harold Alexander, and another British guy, and another British commander named Oliver Lees. These 3 men on the Allied side, these 4 men allowed the Allies to take over the city of Monte Cassino and push towards Rome more easily. I will start with the American commander, Lieutenant Mark Clark. Mark Clark was a person who was one of the leading commanders of the Battle of Monte Cassino. He commanded the 15th Army Group during this fight. His superior, Harold Alexander, ordered the bombing of the Abbey, this decision from Harold Alexander and the cooperation from Mark Clark allowed the monastery to be in ruins and let the Germans fortify it. However, another commander from the Allies, Oliver Lees of the British Army, disliked working with Mark Clark. Mark Clark was an important because he was the one who commanded the bombing of the Abbey on the 15th of February, 1944. These orders were under supervision of his fellow commander, Harold Alexander. Harold Alexander would take the full blame. However, I chose Mark Clark first because he had an importance of the bombing of the Abbey. This would leave the Americans at home shocked that the American Air Force would destroy a religious landmark. This allowed the Germans to fortify the position and keep on pulling their artillery fire much higher, making the Allies tougher time breaking through the Winter Line. Next, I'll explain who Harold Alexander was and how he impacted the Battle of Monte Cassino. Harold Alexander was one of the leading commanders in the Battle of Monte Cassino. Being the superior to instruct Mark Clark to bomb the Abbey, he took full responsibility to bomb the historical landmark. With this decision, this resulted in little advances on the assault against the German Winter Line defenses, thus disrupting the Allied advance in Italy. Only until the 4th assault on the Winter Line that Harold Alexander and the Allies broke through the lines, which they headed for Rome on June 4th. Harold Alexander was the superior to Mark Clark and Sir Oliver Lees. Harold Alexander's Wikipedia page. Alexander remained in command of the 15th Army Group and, with the support of numerous Allied commanders, controversially authorized the bombing of the historic abbey at Monte Cassino, which resulted in little advances on the German Winter Line defenses, which had managed to halt the Allied advance in Italy. It was not until the fourth attempt that the Winter Line was breached by the Allies. Sir Harold Alexander had an impact on the Battle of Monte Cassino because he, along with his fellow army men and commanders, pushed through on the fourth and final attempt to break through the German Winter Line, which was successful. This allowed the Allies to push towards Rome and push out German occupation in the southern regions of Italy. Next, we have Oliver Lees. Oliver Lees was a person who was one of the leading commanders of the Battle of Monte Cassino from the British Army. On Christmas Eve, 1943, Sir Oliver Lees was ordered to take over Montgomery as the 8th Army commander. At the time of his arrival, he discovered the once 8th Army had merged with the new 15th Army Group, which had two other leading commanders, including Mark Clark and Harold Alexander, which these commanders were bogged down near the German Winter Line. This allowed Oliver to know his men and put in formations under his control. In May 1944, witnessing Clark's attempts to break the Winter Line, Sir Oliver Lees directed his army at the fourth and final battle of the Monte Cassino on May 17, 1944. Oliver Lees was an important part of the impact of the Battle of Monte Cassino because he, and along with Harold Alexander, he directed the army to push through and break through the German Winter Line that was part of the Gustav Line, a line that was stretched throughout southern Italy, and allowed them to push towards Rome, which they captured on June 4th, 1944. This wouldn't have been done without these two commanders, making these two people have an impact on the Battle of Monte Cassino and the Italian campaign. The 5 key events that the Americans and their allies saw include the following. Forces who were fighting the Germans witnessed countless artillery attacks on Allied troops, incorrectly assuming that the Monte Cassino Abbey was an observation post fortified with countless Germans. However, the abbey had no Germans at least. Fears were high that it was marked for destruction. For on the 15th of February, 1944, Allied droppers dropped 1,400 tons of its high explosive, causing widespread damage. However, a German force called the Fallschirmjäger defended the abbey during the aftermath of the bombing. This would later result in the Germans heavily fortifying the ruined abbey. This is an example of what the Allies did in February of 1944. February of 1944, the American army captured a strategic point near the hamlet of San Onofrio, less than 1 mile from the Cassino Abbey. An American squad managed a reconnaissance mission against the abbey-like walls, with the monks inside watching the Germans and Americans exchanging gunfire throughout the day. Attempts to take control of the abbey were quashed when heavy machine gun fire poured upon the Americans from the slopes of the monastery. This is the third example from this list. I will provide examples from the third and fourth battle for these next two examples. In mid-February 1944, the Allies bombed the Abbey of Monte Cassino, allowing the Germans to fortify the ruins of this abbey, making sure that the Allies had a tough time breaking through the Winter Line. This resulted in the Americans and their allies to have a sluggish time breaking through the Winter Line. The fourth example describes the third battle, of which Rain had troubles with the Allies. To quote the Battle of Monte Cassino Wikipedia page, success was there for the Allies taking, but by the time a follow-up assault on the left had been ordered that evening. It was too late. Defenses had been reorganized, and more critically, the rain, contrary to the forecast, had started again. Torrents of rain flooded bomb craters, turned rubble into morass, and blotted out communications. The radio sets being incapable of surviving the constant immersion. The dark rain clouds also bolted out of the moonlight, hindering the tasks of clearing routes through the ruins. For the final example, I will be using the fourth and final battle, and including the first assault, which occurred on the 11th of May to the 12th of May, 1944. To quote the Battle of Monte Cassino Wikipedia page and the battle area, which is in part of the fourth and final battle, the first assault between the days of the 11th of May and the 12th of May on Cassino opened at 23 o'clock with the massive artillery bombardment, 1,060 guns on the 8th Army front and 600 guns on the 5th Army front, manned by the British, Americans, Poles, New Zealanders, South Africans, and the French. Within an hour and a half, the attack was in all four sectors. By daylight, the United States 2nd Corps had made little progress, but their 5th Army colleagues, the French Expeditionary Corps, had achieved their objectives and were fending out the Arcereni Mountains towards the 8th Army to the right, rolling up the German positions between the two armies. Next up, we have the perspectives of the American and German perspectives of the Battle of Monte Cassino. The American perspective on the Battle of Monte Cassino was a controversial battle because, quote, from the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, the total ruin of Monte Cassino evoked mixed emotions on both sides, remained one of the most debated decisions by war itself. Americans with loved ones and friends involved in the conflict were angry that their family members might be risking their lives to save a building. Here is the German perspective. The perspective of the Germans during the Battle of Monte Cassino had been to maintain and keep their stronghold over the abbey. This location was one of the last defensive lines before Rome. They believed that maintaining the line and winning the battle would ensure that they had foothold in Italy and boost morale because of the current failures happening on the Eastern Front against the Soviets. For our final category, I will explain what changed between the eras of World War I and World War II. What changed between the First World War and the Second World War is that even though the Germans and Allies still dug the trenches, pillboxes and bomber planes evolved over these periods of time. I will start with the pillboxes. According to the pillbox military of the etymology, German concrete pillboxes discovered by the Allies in Belgium were so small and light that they were easily tilted or turned upside down by the nearby explosion of even two medium 240mm shells. However, these pillboxes were small and cramped. Although World War II pillboxes had larger room, a bigger pillbox, and enough room for machine guns to rotate freely without restricted movement. This section will be dedicated to bombers that were used in the Monte Cassino battle and ones that were used in World War I. Bomber planes changed drastically between World War I and World War II. For example, the Short bomber designed by the Short brothers in 1915 had 250 horsepower that carried either 4 230-pound bombs or 112-pound bombs. However, the bombers used during the Battle of Monte Cassino allowed them to put the monastery into ruins, unlike the Short bomber. For instance, one of these bombers used in the Battle of Monte Cassino was the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. The B-17 had a significant advantage against the Short bomber, including a higher maximum speed of 287 over the Short bomber's 77 miles per hour. This includes a multitude of advantages, being the higher bomb weight. The B-17 was more effective at destroying its targets with its 4,500 pounds of bombs, allowing the B-17 and its fellow Allied bombers to decimate the Monte Cassino monastery. However, this allowed the Germans to fortify positions there. making the Allies' assault take more time than it needed. The commanders, Oliver Lees, Harold Alexander, and Mark Clark, had a significant impact on the Battle of Monte Cassino because of their great leadership and cooperation. The events also had a great impact on how Monte Cassino went out. The bombing of the Abbey was a significant part because of since they bombed it, the Germans fortified it, making it harder to make assaults against the German winter